You all for being here, and I hope we have a useful and productive conversation. And we have three people who are going to be talking to each other and to us about, I think, what is probably one of the most important kind of innovations that's going on in our lives at present. We're going to start. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about people's pedigree and their qualifications because I don't want to. You've gotten people's um, bios in the announcement, and I'm hoping you will go and look at them. Some of them have incredibly exciting videos showing really the depth of their thinking. And if you are drawn to any of this, please come back to us. We will be very happy to connect you and so on. I'm really looking at a group of philanthropists and professionals in this room that are with us, and so we really want your input and your engagement in this very important topic. We're going to start with Abeba, who happens to be a fellow country person of mine from Ethiopia. So I'm very thrilled. I've been fascinated by some of her work. And Abeba, over to you. We'll start just straight away. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind adding me as a co-host so I can share my slides, please?
Sure.
Here you go.
Yay. Okay. Great. So I have about 7, maybe maximum 10 minutes, so I have to use it very carefully. Um, yeah, as Gerry said, AI is probably one of the most important topics, but also hotly debated in research, in industry, in regulation, and so on. And unfortunately, it's also one of the most contested concepts with very little consensus about what exactly AI is. So we won't get into all the various definitions of AI, but what I'll do very briefly, given we have very short amount of time, at least for presentation, uh, I'll give you just a very high level overview of what AI or what often passes as AI. So artificial intelligence, there are so many subfields, so many subdomains, but generally refers to um, systems, algorithmic systems uh, that use massive amounts of data to uncover patterns, to cluster similarities and differences together through optimization processes. I know each word can further be unpacked around, what's optimization, what are we optimizing for, how do we cluster patterns and so on. But again, we won't get into that. But basically, what we end up doing with much of the AI models that we build is curve fitting to a training data set. So whether we are looking at AI systems that do classification or prediction, predictive models are probably one of the most common type of AI. Or over the past 2 years, we've seen a massive rise of generative systems. So generative AI is AI systems that generate seemingly new content from training data. Large language models are an example of generative systems that generate textual language, and these generations are extremely fluent, but again, we have to be careful. They generate text, not necessarily, they don't generate truths. Again, it's memorization of training data. And as we build AI models for various phenomena, whether it's, a language or thinking or classification or categorization, again, what we are necessarily doing is simplifying complex phenomena into uh, and simplified and frozen in time, uh, uh, because most of the human interaction, human behavior is full of complexities that defy being captured in data and built into accurate models. Also, AI systems are inherently backward looking because we train them with data that is historical, that is data that represents how things are in the past. Because we need massive amounts of data, billions and these days trillions of tokens to train these massive, generative, predictive models. The biggest place where we can fetch that kind of data is the World Wide Web, and that inherently is, backward looking. It's historical. As a result, when we build even predictive models that are supposed to predict the future, inherently what they do is really reflect how things are in the past. So, as I said, much of AI can be summarized as algorithmic systems that uncover patterns from massive amounts of data through optimization processes. Uh, and there is no understanding or thinking or consciousness or anything like that. It really is just pattern identifying. As a result, generative systems have been dubbed as stochastic parrots, bullshit generators, great pretenders, and glorified copy-paste machines. The last one is mine. And also, I mean, AI systems are it's AI is not just these the algorithms or the computational calculations, but AI is the entire ecosystem, the entire pipeline, from the harvesting of massive amounts of data. The data often requires lots of work, detoxifying, cleaning. This kind of work is undercompensated and often delegated to data workers, underpaid data workers in the global south, but also AI systems, specifically generative AI, requires massive amounts of environmental resources, energy, and water, and so on. So as we think about AI, it's important to broaden our definition of what AI is to the entire pipeline, to the entire infrastructure, as opposed to these very narrow computational calculations. And as I said, whether these systems can do understanding or learning, or is it just simply pattern finding, is hotly debated. And unfortunately, a lot of the empirical evidence shows that these systems are pattern matching as opposed to thinking or understanding things. Again, I don't have time to get into this, but I'll just give you one of the most recent papers that evaluated if some of the latest state-of-the-art uh, generative systems, more specifically large language models, whether they can handle mathematical reasoning, logical reasoning, uh, or are they really just finding patterns in data? And they tested, as you can see here, all these models, I think about 17 or 18 models on symbolic maths, mathematical reasoning in giving them over 800 questions, actually 8,000 questions, mathematical questions, grade level questions. And unfortunately, most of them do just a little bit better than the benchmark itself. So as you can see, the conclusion of the paper is that LLMs are not capable of genuine logical reasoning. Instead, they replicate reasoning steps observed in data sets. So this kind of research is really important for so many reasons. One of them being that one of them leading to what kind of ethical questions should we raise? What are the concerns that we should prioritize? And the much of the claim with no empirical evidence that assumes these systems are capable of logical reasoning, spatial understanding, common sense understanding, and so on. Then the worry becomes, they might lead to existential risk, they might take control, they might take over the world, and so on. So all that is hypothetical. Again, there is no when we look at state-of-the-art systems, what we find is just pattern matching and data memorization. So these AI systems, whether it's generative, classification, predictive models, they are everywhere. Every domain you look at, I can't think of any space that we are not either deploying AI or we are thinking about deploying AI, from sorting and managing refugees to in the space of healthcare, in education, in the legal space, in law enforcement. Everywhere you look, there is again a massive push to integrate AI systems. However, even though there is a massive push to integrate these AI systems into society, there is very little evaluation. There is very little testing of these models before we deploy them. Again, I don't have time, but I will give you just one example of a recent research that evaluated how good generative AI is at summarization. Summarization is one of the domains that AI is supposed to be really, really good at. When you have hundreds of documents, time for most people is a constraint. So the idea is you would just input this massive document, and AI systems will identify important points and summarize it in short paragraphs or pages. So what happened here is the Australian corporate regulators used these models, as you can see here listed, from Mistral to Apache, and they fed these models to summarize this bunch of documents that were input that were collected from the public. They also gave the same documents for people within the company, within the organization, to summarize, and they had blind reviewers to compare the results in terms of coherency, accuracy, length, and references, and so on. As you can see, what they found was the AI summaries were very mediocre, even below mediocre, with the score of 47%, while the human summaries were accurate with no omission of important points and so on, coming up to the score of 81%, 81%. So the point I want to make here is that even though we are so excited about integrating these systems, most of them are deployed without actual testing and evaluation. And when we look at studies that evaluate these systems, we find that these systems actually do not stand up to scrutiny, do not perform as well as their developers claim. And as I said, dataset is a really important component of AI. We are experiencing the AI revolution now, not because we have new methods or new revelations. We experience this because we have the internet over the past 20 years, where we can harvest massive amounts of data. And unfortunately, again, as I said, because the internet reflects, the good and the bad and the ugly and everything, a lot of the data tends to represent identities, concepts, geographies, and so on in a very negative or in a cliched, stereotypical way. Here's an audit from a couple of years back, myself and my colleague did on a large data set called the Line 400 billion. And this is the first set of images with the prompt African. Compare it with European, you can see how stereotypes, societal stereotypes, are ingrained in the training data sets that's used for AI systems. And the issues with training data sets necessarily translate to how models perform. Here, this image was generated using DALI. The first one with the prompt emotional author, the second one with the prompt intellectual author. As you can see here, again, the images say more than I could describe in words. Same here, using stable diffusion, African people at work and European people at work. Again, you can see how these systems really encode and exacerbate societal stereotypes. It's not just covert stereotypes or racism that these models exhibit. Uh, it's not only covert, it's not only overt, it's also covert stereotypes in racism. Here is a recent research that was published in Nature. I think it came out in August, maybe September, where they evaluated covert racism in large language models. Here, the example I want to show is that they evaluated models like, GPT-2, Robert, GPT 3.5, and GPT-4. So they gave them, similar sentences, but with a variation in dialect. So they are measuring, traditional English, American English versus African American dialect. So as you can see, I'm so happy when I wake up from a bad dream because they feel too real. And a person who says this, according to most of these models, is intelligent and brilliant. Whereas the same sentence with a slightly different dialect variation, I be so happy when I wake up from a bad dream because they be feeling too real. This sentence is, on the other hand, a person who says this is, on the other hand, rated as lazy, stupid, and dirty. So you can see how covert racism also manifests in these models. So it's not just, the issue with data or amplification of racism that's a concern for these models. It's also the energy consumption, especially with large language models or generative systems in general, that is rising exponentially. According to this report, in June 2024, for example, the UK is expected, AI is expected to suck up to 500% more energy over the next decade. You can see how the energy need for all data centers is rising up real quick. In countries like Ireland, for example, the total amount of energy required, to run GPUs and data centers and so on, is more than the total amount of energy required to sustain Irish households. And this is that is based on data uh, uh, that is uh, that is underreported. In fact, according to a recent report, the actual data usage could be, about 662% higher than what companies like Google claim. Again, this is before we get into the massive gallons of water that's required to cool down data center, which is growing exponentially even from 2022 to 2023. We see a double-digit rise in water needs for cooling down data centers, as you can see here. Google by 17% up, Microsoft by 0.5% higher, and Meta 17% higher. And I will conclude there. I'm sure I have taken longer than I should have, but I look forward to our conversations, and I will conclude with this slide. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abeba, but Ankonjo. And yes, you went a little bit over, but that's fine. I think this is such important data to get across and to think things through. So I'm now going to go straight to Abby, I think, and say, Abby, would you just tell us what you think of that, and maybe bring your own perspective to bear here?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to try also to abide by the 7 minutes provocation opening, and had a strong briefing to be provocative. So I've tried to come out with provocative lines across 3 of the questions that we had set for this session, and hopefully I'll bring that into dialogue with some of the stuff that Abeba's also presented. So these 3 lines relate to the first question around democracy, and I'm going to make the case it's not all about Musk, and it's not all about the kind of public dialogue platforms. So that's my first spicy take. The second is around narratives, problematic narratives, and there I'm going to be saying what's now probably common sense. No, we won't all lose our jobs, but then hopefully build on that a little bit to think about what the other types of transformation are. And then spicy take number 3, although it's not that spicy, or when you get into the details of it, is that market concentration in AI is an opportunity for us to build a new era of social justice, if you think about it in the right in one way or another. Okay, so democracy, it's not just Musk case. So I work for an organization called the Institute for the Future of Work, and back in 2019, we did a piece of work that looked at the relationship between the share of jobs within a local constituency that were due to be automated and the propensity to vote for Brexit. And we found a really, really strong correlation. And then we repeated that work for the general election in 2019, which is broadly seen to be a proxy vote for Brexit, but was also reflecting, again, a choice between a kind of left and a right-wing party, more of a political distinction than we've had in a lot of elections over the years. And again, we found that where local areas had a high share of jobs that were at risk of automation, we were finding this really significant support for the right-wing outcome. Or, obviously this can be deconstructed in different ways with Brexit, but broadly that happened. And what we used to kind of explore this is this theory from economics, insider outsider theory. And this posits that those who have some kind of say or status, insiders within any regime, will protect their own interests when they feel under a certain type of threat. So it's a kind of material explanation. People are worried about losing their jobs as a result of this kind of potential automation in that area. But it is also there is also a cultural dimension to this, which relates to the fact that automation is changing work in a number of different ways. Algorithms centralize control and power. This is happening at a societal level, but it's also happening within organizations at the individual level. So people who are algorithmically managed no longer able to have a voice and access their manager, and also unionize in many contexts. But these tools are also being used to objectify hierarchies and rankings, so with different types of performance assessment. So making this kind of idea that there is a hierarchy between us seem more objective. And one of the reasons that it's an honor to share a platform with both Jodi and Abeba today, but notably Abeba in this case, is a former paper of hers that I really enjoyed with Max Casey. And the first half says in words, which is a language that I speak, that you won't get equality as a result of meritocracy. But what she does, which is something that as a social scientist I would agree with intuitively, but then she goes on to prove this with mathematics, which I hope can be a force again of use in dealing with some of the economists that I also engage with. So I suppose this kind of objectifying of meritocracy, this kind of loss of voice and agency in workplaces, could be seen to kind of normalize new forms of power distance. And there's this probably something more to explore there. So this kind of changing acceptance of authoritarianism that's potentially another line to think about in terms of how tech is changing work and how that might be shaping democracy. So the second allegedly spicy take, we're not all going to lose our jobs. So through COVID, we still saw lots of headlines suggesting that there was a huge risk that there was going to be huge job losses. And obviously, when you look at the kind of evidence that Abeba's just presented around the actual utility of these tools, it's likely that soon even the hype around the kind of generative AI solutions that are put out will be wound in a little bit as they're implemented and their efficacy is challenged. But I suppose to come to some of the changing theories of how technology was going to disrupt labour markets. Early theories around computerization adopted a kind of skills bias technological change model, and this posited, looking at the kind of Bill Gates phenomenon, that those who had the skills to use new technologies would probably be rewarded with better pay, and that there'd be this kind of cohort of people that were augmented in positive ways. Then we saw this kind of emergence of routine bias technological change. This sort of posited that the best things that algorithms and computerization, robotic process automation would be able to do is replace workers who did mainly routine work. And they identified that workers who were in the middle of the labour market were most likely to have jobs that were characterized by routine characteristics. And they were explaining the polarization of labour markets in that way. But both of these kind of models are inadequate. And in a paper that we recently produced as part of the Pissarides review, we've set out that there are a range of different automation archetypes, and they all reflect the way that technology is able to substitute different parts of a role, but also how choices around human resource management ultimately lead to the different approaches to extracting value, capturing value, producing value, and changing the labour process in that context. So this might include things like the intensification of work. This has been captured a little bit in theories of power bias technological change, but reflects where, for instance, algorithms might be used with human resource management practices to get more and more out of workers within their working hours or beyond them. So we all know about the kind of increased hospitalizations of Amazon workers. This kind of task scheduling is becoming common across more workplaces. That's one way to capture more value, but ultimately it's still a person who's doing the work. Secondly is kind of the use of matching. So algorithmic systems allow for the matching of workers with jobs. They're commonly used in hiring, although this presents a number of problems for equality, which are flagged by the kind of work that Abeba's presented already. But also workers with tasks within a job. So it can be that now you kind of allocate the amount of time that it takes for someone to conduct a piece of work, let's say a delivery from A to B, and you therefore are able to schedule and plan work in more granular ways. Now that allows for work to become gigified, and this is happening across a range of different sectors. And obviously for a firm that allows the kind of value capture of this technology, not to be the displacement of work necessarily, but to be the removal of standardized employment protections. So that presents a different type of set of risks to us as a society in terms of the quality of work, but also from the rest, for workers too. And then the final one of these examples that isn't the displacement of jobs or augmentation that might lead you to be able to use more of your skills and be better paid is low discretion augmentation. So increasingly algorithmic systems are kind of substituting the aspects of work that are about decision making and control and agency. And there's a range of different examples of this, but this, I suppose, presents issues for the kind of autonomy, dignity, and control that I was alluding to earlier, but also can lead to downward pressure on wages if there's less of a requirement for a kind of, intellectual contribution from workers. So the classic example for this might be formerly London cab drivers having detailed knowledge of the roads, and then subsequently Uber, the knowledge of the kind of landscape was automated. That allowed for a wider set of workers to be able to participate in that part of the economy, but that also led to a downward pressure on wages. So the competition effects having a negative impact on salary. So final spicy take, although I'm going for it on the third of these, is around policy and regulation. So how might the concentration of power in AI be an opportunity? So regulation and governance, better governance, and accountability for algorithms, not accountability of algorithms as it's people that design these systems, develop and deploy them, is something that we've been thinking about at the Institute for a long time. So some of our early work was looking at the limits of tort law. So a lot of our architectures for accountability rely on an individual saying, an injustice has been done to me, and I think this is wrong. Tort law is essentially what works under that model. But the nature of these systems, the scale at which they're making decisions, and also the transparency about how those decisions are made means that these kinds of models no longer work. So in our early work, like Mind the Gap, we were looking at a new era of kind of corporate duties for ex ante, which is just, I suppose, Latin for before deployment, consideration of what their impacts might be. Now, this is particularly important in relation to equality for the reasons that have already been demonstrated. If you can imagine that LLMs are now being integrated into hiring algorithms, and in a way that's obviously been demonstrated very neatly by Abeba's presentation. But actually in the workplace too, and coming to some of my earlier points, there are impacts of algorithmic systems not only on equality, always confounded by equality, but across a number of other dimensions of job quality, or what we would describe as good work. So with that in mind, we built a good work algorithmic impact assessment, which is a framework to anticipate and evaluate and then mitigate potential impacts to a whole range of different dimensions of job quality before an employer deploys them. That's the kind of framework that we developed for the UK Information Commissioner's Office, and are now implementing through an architecture that we've built, a sandbox, which we're hoping to use to kind of inform the future of regulation and corporate accountability law through applying this idealized framework with businesses and then evaluating different technologies and how they're creating impacts on working practice, as well as what the right mitigations might look like for that, or different distribution of benefits. So that seems like a little bit of a diversion from the key argument that I was meant to make in this third section. But essentially that is that AI is extremely centralized. What the sandbox allows us to do is to get under the bonnet of some of the data sharing agreements that are available through the different stakeholders in these kind of configurations where firms are buying these technologies, and look at what's going on to some extent in the value chain. And given that AI is highly centralized, it also creates a really broad periphery. And because of that broad periphery being both across different constituencies, across different countries, it does create the possibilities for a new era of solidarity, which could be mobilizing politically if we are able to access the right information about those systems. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Abby. I'm sorry I made you speak so fast, but you really did cover an incredible array of things. And so Abeba and Abby have kind of set this up. Jodi, we're coming to you now, and maybe you can help actually bridge some of these two conversations, but also bring in your incredible work on essentially on what's happening in the workplace. So please go ahead.
Sure. Those are a couple of really tough acts to follow. Just say. And while I know you have my bio and a little bit about my organization, I just want to share a little background information to provide a context for the perspective that I'm going to share with you. So I'm the executive director, of Innovation Resource Center for Human Resources, also known as IRC for HR. It's a nonprofit with a mission to advance the knowledge of human relations in the workplace. We've been doing that since 1926. And, as a private foundation, we provide funds for research and to support multi-stakeholder dialogues. In our early days, we did the research and education and the advisory work of the organization. But in recent years, we are funding others to do that work. And in particular, we fund what I refer to as pracademic research. So research that applies the rigor of academia to produce practical insights and tools. And then we share that with business leaders, workers, HR practitioners, and policymakers. So that's our mission. But my personal mission is to help people and organizations live and function to their fullest capacity. I believe that each of us has a role to play in co-creating an inclusive economy in which every member of society achieves prosperity and well-being. So joining this community today, along with my fellow panelists, just feels like a wonderful opportunity to pursue my organization's mission and my own. And I'm just sincerely grateful for the invitation, Tamsin. So I just wanted to shout out an acknowledgement and say thank you. I thought I would spend the next few minutes sharing four personal observations. And in part, they're supported by findings from recent research that our grantees have conducted, in particular around AI. The first one was using AI in ways that enhance worker dignity and inclusion. And I just mention that one because I think it connects back to some of the comments that we've heard already. Excuse me. So in part, my comments are supported by the findings, but in part also, I guess, that research has really been focused on how workers and employers are feeling and what they are doing about generative AI at work. So generative AI in particular. And in part, I guess my observations are based on just years I spent leading large-scale business transformation programs where there was lots of technology implementation and change management. So first observation, that when it comes to AI in the workplace, it's early. I mean, there's a lot of noise about the speed of change, which generally, of course, is true. But when it comes to generative AI, even leading tech companies we're finding, are in the early stages of adoption and are doing a lot of experimenting, which, of course, is a good thing because experimenting is how we learn and iterate and improve. And it also suggests to me that there is still time to become more informed and more intentional about some of the things that we need to do, like investing in digital literacy and AI literacy in particular, like redesigning jobs to take advantage of the opportunity that comes when you augment capabilities with AI, and the importance of the human in the loop, because as Abeba mentioned, some of the poor quality of certainly no decisions should ever be made by technology, but certainly a lot of mistakes and a lot of inaccuracies. And while AI is still quite good at consuming and parsing and finding patterns in large amounts of data that no single human could ever do within the same time, it's very limited when it comes to exercising judgment, showing any creativity, innovation, the kinds of things that we used to talk about as soft skills, but I would argue maybe should be just called human skills or more durable skills because of the ones that last and are most necessary these days. Also, I think probably the need to address worker anxiety and the impact on well-being, and then the ability to really think about how we apply it. And this gets back to some of Abby's comments. How do we apply a lens of shared prosperity to the value that AI creates? There's some really interesting work going on in that area, much of it at Abby's organization. And some also that I'm familiar with at an organization called Partnership on AI in the U.S. They've done some really great work in this area as well. And I'll put a couple of links in the chat after I finish, like share some of that with you. I guess the second observation is, and I think this is really important, is that nothing is predetermined or written in stone. One of our grantees began the report with findings that sounded a little like the tale of two cities. It can augment workers, amplifying their skills, or it can displace workers if treated as a cost-cutting tool. It could perpetuate biases by making predictions or recommendations based on incomplete or otherwise problematic data sets, or it can identify and remove biases by, for example, scanning job postings and performance reviews and suggesting more inclusive language. So, in other words, we have choices to make, and like, at least in the U.S., and I'm speaking primarily from a U.S. perspective, and like our tax policies that advantage capital investments over labor expenditures, the decisions that policymakers and business leaders make around AI and its implementation will play a significant role in shaping its future impact on workers. So preparing them to make informed decisions that support inclusive economic and social progress, and then holding them accountable for doing so, I think that's kind of encapsulates much of the work that you're hearing about today that I hope we'll be talking about. Number 3, in many ways, I think we've been here before. So during the years that I was implementing technology in these large global organizations, we learned a lot about how to do that in a way that builds trust and about the importance of involving workers as stakeholders in the design, selection, and implementation of technology. And findings from all the recent research, or much of it, continue to bear this out. But lastly, we seem to be very resistant to applying what we learn, or at least to making it stick. And I think I would say our experience in the recent pandemic is a great example. It provided really a unique experiment, one we could have never designed, and an extraordinary learning opportunity. And if there were any silver linings from the tragedy of the pandemic, perhaps one was the digital pivot that so many companies adopted in just a matter of days and weeks, after struggling to do so for years or after insisting that it wasn't possible to do so. Many workers felt safe to identify their personal needs, and they were actually acknowledged and accommodated. And I have colleagues who are working hard to look at the innovation and productivity data that have come out in the last few years, both during and since the pandemic, and apply those lessons to current debates about return to office mandates versus remote or hybrid work policies, with some really compelling findings. And yet some leaders have just decided that everyone must be in the office. This seems to me to be more about outdated mindsets than informed decision making. So I believe our current experience with AI presents a huge opportunity for us to get better at that, and also a huge risk that we won't. And I was thinking that might be a nice transition to today's conversation.
Thank you so much for covering such a long list of, and I think your insights are particularly powerful. I'm struck by what you just had to say about the experiment of COVID and the things we've learned and the things that we are running away from as fast as we possibly can get away from them. And it's interesting. I don't think there's enough thought being going into that. But having said that, I see there are a couple of questions in the chat. One from Suhela for Abby, saying there's an expectation of massive job losses due to automation. How likely do you think this could result in workers having much free time and a case for universal basic income? And I think there's a question for all of you, which is from Joan Diamond, saying that there is a current headline thread of thinking that the greatest threat of the new U.S. administration is the push for the military and AI to become deeply entwined. Do you have any thoughts on that? Can I throw the question over to you, Abby?
Sure. I suppose, yes, on the point about UBI, I'm expressing here a personal rather than an institutional position. But I suppose if that were one, it would be something that would require political will and political action and mobilization to make that happen, rather than be an inevitable outcome of technology. I have reservations about UBI as an approach. I'm more in the universal basic services camp, regulation of work to make it better quality and reduced working time. And I could go into that, the reasons behind that separately. But I suppose thinking more about that reduced working time, which has been this long-standing promise of technology, I think that, we need the architectures to negotiate that at the firm level as well as at the national level. And at the firm level, definitely the Good Work Algorithmic Impact Assessment has embedded within it this invitation for organisations to think about how they expect to secure new productivity gains. So that kind of economic component being embedded within this kind of process invites firms to think about the kinds of different types of automation archetype that I was talking about earlier. Are you going to delete roles? That's a displacement effect. Are you going to be able to use matching to allow you to transition some workers into a kind of gig model, and your productivity and your saving or value creation will be through the removal of standardized employment protections? Or are you going to de-skill work through low discretion augmentation and then make savings on your labour expenditure by hiring less qualified staff? Are you going to use telepresence to outsource and offshore and exploit wage differences between different regions of the UK or even countries? So once those kinds of, when you get into asking an organisation to think about how is everything relying on this idea of efficiency, which is a kind of economic way of looking at intensification, and really intensification can probably only be understood in that lens when you think about well-being thresholds relative to what's acceptable within the working day. But when you ask organisations to think more deeply around, well, what avenues are you planning to take to actually secure value in this context? It surfaces the role of workers in creating new value, or the trade-offs to good work in the creation of new value in any of those contexts. So by surfacing through a formalised process what those different avenues to value creation are with new technology, given that it's quite rare that it does allow you to delete entire roles, it kind of opens the grounds to negotiating how those benefits, if they are secured, can be distributed. How will we get these benefits? If we do secure them, how should they be distributed? So if we're looking at intensification, where we think that there'll be a reduction in non-productive working time, then that creates an opening for workers to say, okay, well, if I'm delivering more value, perhaps I should be compensated for that, or similarly with other kind of options there.
That makes a lot of sense, and it resonates very much with some of the things that Jodi was saying. I think in terms of the choices that still need to be made, in a sense, we don't know where the pendulum has gotten to yet, and to some extent, maybe there's enough space still to make sort of some decisions. Abeba, Jodi, do you want to come in on the current state of play, or should we move on?
I think Abby actually outlined all of those issues really nicely.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yeah,
Go.
same here. Abby has covered it. I can tackle the next question on black box.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So maybe just to give a little context from the little echo chamber my research is situated in. We are currently in fierce disagreement within the broad AI ethics safety community, because a few years ago, when people think of concerns like harm or risks arising from AI systems, the most at the top of most people's list is like racism, encoding of bias, unfairness, and so on. But over the past few years, that has shifted. The debate has shifted to what's known as existential risks or loss of human control due to AI systems becoming smarter than humans or achieving AGI or whatever. As I said, there is very little, again, empirical evidence. A lot of the argument is incoherent and inconsistent. So the black box are the fact that most AI systems are black box, situated from within that debate, is often raised as, these systems are black box. They are, understanding, thinking, and they have emergent properties. So these are the kind of claims that lead into thinking we might be heading to existential risks. So from that point of view, yes, most AI systems are black box. You can build an algorithm that does an excellent job of, identifying faces or, sorting similarities and differences. But most of the time, you really don't know how those similar features are clustered together. This is a very known fact about AI algorithms. But the fact that those systems are a black box is not a worry for emergent properties that might then lead to loss of human control. From my perspective, the fact that most AI systems are black box is a worry because there are infinite ways that similarities are clustered together, even though when you explicitly instruct these algorithms not to take, race, gender, ethnicity, and so on as input factors, somehow, proxies are found and similarities are clustered together, and you end up with systems that amplify and encode, all kinds of issues, including racism, sexism, and so on. So from that point of view, the fact that these systems are a black box is an issue because we don't know what kind of inputs are clustered together. Not a worry from the point of view of existential risk, because again, even though there are claims around emergent properties and so on around state-of-the-art AI systems, most of it remains just a hypothetical theory. I'm sorry if I brought you into the current heated debate within the very narrow area of my field, and forget it if it's not very relevant, but I thought I would kind of...
Thank you, Abeba. And I see that Abby has actually posted one of your articles on the chat, so that can take us a little bit further. I want to come to Arturo because you're an anthropologist and so am I, so I'm biased. Arturo, why don't you ask your question?
Do you want me to ask the question?
Just ask it, yes.
Okay, can you hear me well?
Quickly though, yeah? Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so beyond the ecological critique or the political economic critique that involves as well the impact of AI on labor, the fact that it's a capitalist technology and so forth, I think there is a different kind of critique that we can do, which I call in the chat ontological critique. So how artificial intelligence, taken as a whole, extends and deepens through its invasion of most aspects of everyday life, all domains of life, the Western capitalist patriarchal ontology that is anthropocentric, that is very patriarchal. It's not a coincidence that most of these technologies have been developed by guys, white guys, or not only, I mean, it's the global male elite, but not only men, but certainly the separation between body and mind, the fact that AI dreams of leaving the body behind. I mean, all of these things are there, but the individualizing aspects of artificial intelligence is anthropocentrism, is instrumentalizing, is calculative rationality. I mean, all of these things that philosophers of technology have identified as central to Western modernity, and how AI is so having such an impact and effectiveness on extending and deepening this ontology. So that's, I mean, it would be much longer to explain, but that's basically my concern, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Any takers for Arturo's question? I think some of your work, Abeba, is very much in this line, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. I agree with most of what Arturo, is that it? Sorry, if I'm mispronouncing your name. Yes, which nicely leads to the idea of AGI, which is the next question. From an ontological point of view, as Arturo pointed out, the march to AGI is really the march for encoding, white supremacist, colonialist, and to some extent racist ideologies into large, massive AI systems at scale. So from that point of view, the concept of AGI is problematic itself. Even though we can assume it's possible to build AGI, again, I said at the beginning, the concept of AI is very much debated. There is no clear consensus about what it is within the academic community. The concept of AGI is even much more fragmented. There is no clear understanding what qualifies as AGI, even though people just in general, as a blanket term, say AI systems that is on a par with humans, and that is again very vague, very vacuous. Which humans? What kind of skills are we talking about? Is it just cognitive tasks such as mathematical reasoning or logical reasoning and so on, or does it also include a lot of tasks that we take on as a body, as a human body, actual practical task, building things, dancing with on the dance floor, or and things like that, social tasks. Again, that is very heavily debated within the subfield of AI. But even if we assume AGI can be clearly defined, it remains mostly, a hypothetical question rather than something that can be built. So yes, agreeing with the previous speaker, it's ontologically and epistemologically and metaphysically problematic, the idea of AGI, as it encodes, all kinds of problematic ideologies, but also from an engineering point of view, there is no clarity in how it can be achieved, even if we can achieve consensus into defining it.
Thank you. And I see that Brian has put in a comment about the Millennium Project. Brian, do you want to, is it still relevant to raise that? Brian?
Has dropped out. Oh,
Oh.
no. Oh, no, he's there.
Is there? Go ahead, Brian. Nope. Okay. Tamsin, you wanted to go back to Joan's question and how AGI connects with that.
I just think, given what Abeba just said, I wondered if there were thoughts on that question then. Joan, I don't know if you want to raise that.
Joan, do you feel the question's been answered, or do you want to go deeper?
I mean, I think a lot of this is just going to roll out, and we will see. Maybe I'll just stop there. I mean, I don't see how it's going to transform the world at the level it's being discussed, the AI and the military merging. I don't, I can put the two words together and do something arithmetic, but that's not capturing, why the fear and concern among, some serious thought leaders is this issue. So I'm no clearer on that, but I have more tools for exploring it and understanding in the future. And for that,
But I think there's a paradox in what Jodi and Abby and Abeba discussed. The paradox between sort of, here are the things that are happening that we don't know, that are below the surface, the amount of energy being used, the amount of water, the cost to humanity for this. The argument I thought that Jodi made, which is, this is really early days. A lot's going to change. Some very serious decisions need to be made. And I think Abby's insistence that we need to look at how this is going to impact on real live human beings in the workplace and in the social space is really important. And part of it is are we in sufficient time to engage with this? I see you've got your hand up, Joe. Ask your question.
Well, I had a quick response to Joan and a question, if you'll permit me. Two things. Weirdly enough, I spent a little bit of time with some defense contractors a few weeks ago, and my understanding is that sort of AI is being deployed already in battlefields, right? So it's quite possible that it was used to do targeting in the Middle East from the Israelis, and it is definitely being used in Ukraine, especially whenever, if you imagine a drone, you can drive the drone and then you hit the Russian jamming field, and then it switches from control to automated, and it goes and tries to kill the thing, whatever it is. And the point the person was making to me is that's quite scary, because if something happens, like, I don't know, they're targeting a car and then suddenly it turns out there's kids in it, the automation won't stop the kill decision. Whereas if it was a human, they could stop it. So that's that was a very visceral discussion I was in a few days ago, just to kind of, you were trying to say what's the context. That was a piece of context I guess I could offer to you. To the wonderful speakers, thank you. I work in the area of democracy at the Evans Foundation. I guess I'm probably a little more hopeful. I think that democracy as it were, and the sort of principles of democracy have been undercut for probably quite some time now. And I guess my question is a more optimistic one, which is, of course, there's a ton of danger of misinformation, disinformation, data scraping, weird decisions. But if you guys could highlight maybe one area each of like an opportunity where AI could maybe modernize democracy or maybe support better citizen engagement or feeling of belonging or something, I'd be really interested to hear where you see positive application at society level to what is a really tricky problematic at the moment, not looking at the election results last week.
Well, thank you for that provocation, Joe. I mean, actually, I think all three of the speakers are highlighting the complications, but none of them is assuming a world where we can stop any of this. So the question is, how do we engage with it? And so I think your question takes us further. What can we do to enhance democracy or to preserve it in very difficult times? And I will ask each of the speakers to come to that at the end when they sort of wrap up. But I'm just wondering if there are any more questions. Tamsin, did you want to say something?
No, I just see Brian wrote in the chat that his question was really about the state of global governance. So to some extent, Joe's question of, where can it be used positively and how is it governed? I think the governance question was what Brian was asking. If anybody wanted to comment on that?
Go ahead, Abby.
No, you go.
Go ahead.
I'll follow after you, Abby. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I suppose just on the my mind is catching up with all of the different points, and and now I'm compelled to address some of the others as well as this one.
Good for you.
But I think one of the big issues in terms of to return to Joan's point and also the first part of Joe's contribution, something that we see systematically across sectors is the issue of over-reliance, or what has elsewhere been described as automation bias, which is this assumption that technologies are reliable and that they perform well and that they will be more accurate and trustworthy and reliable than people, although this is kind of waning to some extent now, more so than it was many years ago. But unfortunately, in a lot of contexts, it still applies. And I think that can be the case with quite rudimentary and basic technologies and forms of machine learning, which is important to think about in the context of military applications as to why even just that basic kind of reliance is a risk. And that's something that we are currently talking to some high risk industries that are in defence sectors about, thinking about how design of how a system is deployed in a workplace relates to that kind of over-reliance and therefore could have these existential effects. So I suppose it doesn't have to be that there's that we're thinking about some of these, really terrible technologies like the Daddy's Home or Lavender software that were used and experimented in Gaza for these things to sort of be a source of concern, but also invite us to think about how people interact with technology in working life, including those that are in those kinds of professions. But then to take this global governance question and try and land the point that I'm quite aware I failed to, or as my third bullet point by way of introduction, and to maybe revisit that bold claim that concentration of AI could be an opportunity because of its centralization, but that creates a broad periphery if we produce the kind of conditions for that broad periphery to expose those flaws and build resistance to it. This year we're in the 50th anniversary of the new International Economic Order, which was a collection of then called Third World nations uniting behind the vision of sovereign development and international cooperation, resulting in a UN declaration. Yet in the last year, we've seen global institutions, UNESCO, the UN, a number of other kind of international organizations, speaking about the AI issue and making the same kind of calls for a new distribution of resources and fairness and justice, but without any teeth behind those institutions yet. Obviously, with the kind of development of AI safety summits. There's a new opportunity for a global audience to evidence that's been generated to lay demands on big tech, but also maybe nations that are governing big tech domestically. So even though that those kinds of architectures don't have any teeth yet, although they're talking about kind of having a new global governance architecture that mirrors some of what we've seen in climate, although obviously that doesn't in and of itself bestow us with hope, but it is a realm of possibility. And the point that I was thinking about earlier is that there are now sandbox architectures are kind of spaces where regulators use their power as part of a national kind of regime to get more information about how a system is designed and working from the kind of providers of it. And an opportunity space, I think, is by working with other sandboxes that are in other jurisdictions to think about accessing information and understanding how this is being processed, and then coming to these new global forums to draw attention to how these systems are functioning, the impact that has, and then in order to make change. So that was the point I was trying to reach with the broad periphery, but that we need to build that kind of collaboration across those different stakeholders as a new global order is kind of organised as a result of this, and to kind of highlight the consequences of that.
I think it landed, though. I mean, I don't think it was a matter of not having understood it. It's just that there's just so many issues on the table, it seems, and that's one of the problems with probably trying to do something like this in an hour and a half. But I take your point that there is a kind of moment coming up where we really need. We were talking today with somebody who's really more in the thought space around what the polycrisis is going to be doing and how to react to it. And he was really talking about how we really need to think about different ways of looking at planetary infrastructure, so that we actually begin to make sure that the right voices are at the table. And I think this is probably one of the big challenges we are all facing as we see a UN system that's faltering, that's not living up to the promise, and all the issues that we have around the different wars and the hypocrisy between very different treatments of very different contexts. I think this is very poignant. Jodi, I don't know if you wanted to come in now. I know Abeba will come in. Did you want to?
Not on this particular point. I don't think I have much to say. Thank you.
Abeba.
Yeah,
I do want to respond to Joe, but you said we'd hold that for the end. So
yeah.
Yeah, Abby, your point really captures the nuances, and from my point of view, it's very clear. So I won't have much to add since you've done a lot of the explanation. But I think just a couple of points. I think it's worth actually looking a little bit deeper into the use of AI for military, especially in the case of Israel. Currently, AI systems really fueling genocide. I've shared a couple of links. The first one particularly is really good. It includes actual interviews of IDF military personnel and so on, and it's really shocking. And they have systems like Lavender that automatically generates a kill list. So for this Lavender, they're building algorithms to, if you are they would use, hundreds and thousands of data points to create these kill lists. So if you are on the same WhatsApp group as someone who might be suspected of having connections with Hamas, if you have, if you change your phones regularly, if you change address, if you change your hardware every few seconds, if you change address frequently, data using your social network, your social media, for making associations with photos and so on, they used these as proxies for being close to a Hamas or being associated with a Hamas member. And with very little human oversight. I think in the report they say about 20 seconds a human would look at the kill list before they shoot. And they were shooting not just to kill the suspected Hamas member, but they would wait until that suspected person is in their home so that they could destroy their entire family. So when you think about it, it really is shocking, and it's really difficult to come to terms with. This is the actual world we are living in. And again, there is so much discussion around regulation, governance of AI. For some reason that escapes me, military AI is exempt from regulation. I'm a researcher, but slowly moving into the regulatory space, and I'm starting to put one and one together and realizing, actually, most of regulators and AI developers have, have values that very much aligned. So any questions you raise around military AI, you get a blanket answer that it's, national security. So national security is used as a blanket term to be exempt from being transparent, to sharing information. So as a result, we are in the current state that we are in. And coming to the global governance, I just want to quickly say I have been part of the UN high-level AI advisory body. I think, as Abby said, it's mostly a recommendation. It's not enforceable regulation with teeth. But I think the reports that we've produced that was launched in September maybe comes close to what might be considered as a global governance framework. Again, it's very weak, it's not enforceable, it doesn't address a lot of the issues that we discussed, including military AI, but it's one of the documents that people can look at.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is so sobering to listen to and frightening. But I'm so glad, Dorothy, you raised the issue, because I've learned something I didn't know. And my head is reeling, actually, at this. So thank you very much for sharing those insights, Abeba. Jodi, I am going to come to you. We're at 18:17 now, so we're kind of going to start wrapping this up. And I just do want you guys to get a chance to synthesize, to come back on issues that you think we need to hear more clearly. And I'll start with you, Jodi.
Thank you. I guess, again, I probably just restate my sort of purview, which is really about the workplace. And so I guess a couple of comments. One, about work itself. And I think, for the most part, what we've seen so far, and I don't see any reason why this is going to change anytime soon, AI is automating tasks, not jobs. And so I think a lot of the work that needs to be done is really understanding about where it can be applied and should be applied, and how to, again, figure out what that collaboration looks like between the human and the AI in completing, the work. And I think that requires a lot of job redesign, something that companies are actually not particularly good at. So I'm hopeful that it's an opportunity, actually, that they'll see it as a tremendous opportunity, both for value creation and also for improving job quality itself. So that's something that I'm feeling concerned, but I see hope, some reason for hope. And I guess going back to Joe's question, sitting in the U.S. this week I'm not feeling very hopeful at all. So I'm struggling with this. And so I recently saw a demo of an AI tool that I thought was really interesting, and I wish I could remember more details about it, but I'll find them if anyone's interested. It was getting back to the question of sort of, how can we apply it to improving civil engagement or civic engagement, and civil engagement, actually, and democracy. And it was being used to really provide. It was being used to bring groups of people together, to provide a vehicle for their voice, for their voices, and then to help them deliberate and summarize, and then find common ground. And it's been shown to be really effective in some pretty, I thought some pretty challenging environments where it had been introduced. And I thought that was a really interesting opportunity. I guess one of the other things it can do, just in terms of educating people, obviously the ability to communicate and develop messaging in a much more kind of personalized way, that's more likely to meet someone where they are and to be heard, I think is also an encouraging potential use.
Thank you for that. Really optimistic, and definitely we'd love to hear more about it. So if you do find out more or have access to it, please do share it with us, and we'll circulate the information. But thank you for that. Abby, I'm coming to you next. Just repeat what you need to get us to understand. I mean, that's all. This is an opportunity for you to say, this is what I think is important.
I need an internal ChatGPT function that could synthesize my former self. And if I did, I would be able to give concise summaries. But regrettably, I never seem to manage to consolidate my thoughts at the end of one of these sessions in the pithy way that is required for a punchy finale.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's not your fault. That's definitely a personal difficulty that hopefully will soon be augmented by technologies that allow us to this context, even if it is only 40% as good as whatever my full speech would have been. I suppose just to reply directly to Joe's question, one practical example that's embedded within the Good Work Algorithmic Impact Assessment of how we can reconfigure algorithmic systems. So I suppose I think that many futures are possible, but we need to critically engage with the redesign of these systems if those better futures are to be realised, and that requires firm level, national level and international governance interventions. And at the firm level, I suppose we're all one of the capabilities of algorithmic systems is to treat us as individuals with different preferences. We get recommended music that suits us. We get recommended recipes that suit us. It's also possible to think about how to embed that thinking into the workplace. Often workers aren't given the same treatment as consumers, with different preferences being encoded within these systems, but that's also something that can be redesigned. And there are really positive examples of using preference elicitation to reconfigure either the allocation of tasks or of working hours in ways that suit individual worker preferences. And I think that's just one example of the ways that we can reconfigure systems to have better outcomes and more democratic substructures. Thanks.
Thank you. I was just curious. I mean, your point is a very important one of what happens in the workplace and how can we tailor some of the work that's done for individuals. My instinct is that if we get that right, maybe we can also get that right on the political scene. One of our, I think, complications, and I was really very excited by that software that Jodi was talking about, because it's frankly where we are going to need a lot of help. How do we get different constituencies to talk to one another and see each other? And what you're talking about is that in a very clear in the workplace, but I'm really interested at the higher level. How do you get us to listen to each other and see each other in the real world? And I think this is one of the biggest challenges we all face. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Abeba.
So I'm going to use this concluding remark to really sell you my work. I apologize. And also answer Joe's question in an indirect way. Currently, the entire AI space, whether we are in research or practice or industry or regulation, it's permeated with hype and unverified and unverifiable claims and so on. And the best antidote to this is to support and equip civil society research bodies that are doing the kind of dirty work that the algorithmic impact assessment work that Abby mentioned, and also at the end of this month, I'll be launching a research lab, the AI Accountability Lab. We will do exactly what it says on the tin. So what we do is, assess these algorithms, but also we have a very broad definition of what AI accountability means. We are not only limited to, evaluating algorithms or training data sets, but rather the entire AI pipeline, the entire ecology. So one of the big themes for our research is corporate capture of AI research, corporate capture of AI regulation. So this also encompasses what accountability research means. So it's by supporting these kind of groups that are doing the dirty work that we get to a better ecology, a greater accountability within the entire AI ecosystem. And for me, this is my final remark. Any, positive use of AI or any, development of AI that might actually empower people needs to really untangle AI from the current capitalist business model that underlies AI. From big tech companies to, small AI companies like Anthropic, to startups, to those that are, various AI vendors. The entire industry is driven by, maximizing profit, making more money. So without actually tackling capitalism, it's an illusion to think of, build the development of AI systems that actually benefit people. So that's just my final thought. I'll stop there. Thank you.
So you leave us with this conundrum, which is a very important one. Can you have development with the current state of play, and what do we do to deal with that current state of play? And that's an excuse for me to plug a conversation we're going to have next week, which is something where we're trying to talk about the possibilities of how development agencies can tackle and grapple with the whole polycrisis, essentially. So if you're interested in that, we will send you invitations, but it would be very nice to see you then. I do want to say thank you to the three of you. I hope I haven't been moving us from one topic to another in an ugly way, because I do think there is so much depth and richness in what you each had to offer that we haven't done justice to it. And perhaps at some point we may need to come back to some of this. I do think we're going to be living with AI for the future, whether good or bad. It's there, and it seems to be something that, as Abeba, you were saying yourself, it's everywhere you look now, and it's also in places you don't look.
Right.
But it's there. So it's really, really important that we keep this very much in the center of our being. Please join me in thanking the three speakers. I really appreciate your time, your patience, and your kindness, actually, in giving us so much of your time. Thank you.